Okay, so let's talk about range bound romance. So I believe this is a pattern of development, but especially in like this dysfunctional modernity. Um, this isn't normal for our genetics, right? To come from broken homes, to have these kind of issues, to be raised without one polar energy is not common. And as far as our genetic history, and we have to understand patterns and see how we recreate them. Have to understand that we recreate the relationships we're familiar with. So you'll see history repeating itself, and this is for both sexes. This example is from the daughter's perspective, right? So a normal developmental cycle is father's masculine is primary. She trusts her father as an external masculine, and historically, and I think naturally, that's handed off to a husband, and she trusts him as the external masculine to balance herself. The problem with modern structures is most of the time the father is not in the home, and now you have a new norm. And what does that cause? Like, what are the historical echoes of that childhood? Well, at the end of the day, it's a part time daughter, right? So if your father's not the trusted external masculine, your natural orientation, you have to father yourself, really. And that's what's more comfortable. And so you can come from father's homes, and there's a lot of, you could say, independent women, which is a positive thing. You could say stubborn or not able to bond with a masculine and trust an external masculine because that's not what's familiar with them. And so you lack masculine counterbalancing, mature masculine counterbalancing, right? You're relying upon yourself to balance your own masculine, and to whatever form that takes. And a lot of times, like for example, early sexuality is common in daughters without fathers. They're um, uh, they will menstruate earlier, right? So they'll start puberty earlier, like a year earlier on average, right? Higher levels of early teenage pregnancy, higher levels of uh, uh, early sexuality. What this is like they are parenting themselves, right? They're relying upon any kind of masculine figure and themselves, and they are kind of get desperate for the masculine, and so they'll seek it out. They'll try to draw more and more attention, however, masculine attention, however they can get it. Instead of a parental figure, it's a sexual attraction in order to get masculine counterbalancing. The problem is it just tends to attract the wrong kind of men. It tends to attract men who are just predatory, and now you have a compounding cycle, right? So if you get abandoned by your father or the father's pushed out, whatever happens, and then you get, you can be in sexual relationships with many alpha men who just get sexuality and leave, get abandoned, and now you have a familiarity abandoned by the masculine, which you try to avoid. So you're in a difficult position from this perspective of female development, but it is a comfort zone. So what you'll see is like a repetition of the patterns. And what's the habit? Weekend visits in his space, remote connections. So you're calling your father. Self masculine is primary, ultimately, right? The father in this relationship, the masculine is auxiliary. You avoid abandonment as much as possible. So with time, I think you avoid the people that are just pleasure picky, the men who have, or I mean, it becomes a cycle where you constantly chase alphas until you get less and less, uh, you know, uh, powerful alphas, and it's more and more of a pair bonding problem. So the more partners you have, the more pair bonding problem you have. Um, the less access, the less accessible your suitors are. So you try to avoid that. Now, how does this happen? So how does it become a mirror? And this is why I call it range bound. Because you're a part-time daughter, you only, and you're repeating this pattern, you want to be a part-time wife. That's what's familiar to you. And so, for example, like in a single mom relationship, what's familiar to her? Weekend visits with the dad, weekend visits with the husband. On the phone with the dad, on the phone with the husband. In his space, in his space. Self-masculine is still primary, just like it's in childhood. And so the trust of the external masculine is not there. It's wounded not only by the father's absence, but wounded by the experience of men as they're in their 20s, and they only are attracted to the most concentrated masculinity, which tends to just dine and dip, right, so to speak. So there's all this fear around trusting an external masculine. It's never been true as a child. As the father's never been dependable, even if he wanted to be. Like the courts aren't there supporting that relationship, etc., etc. Right? It's repeated in the dating. Right? As you get to this point, the masculine, if you choose to like be attracted to the men you're attracted to at 14, 15, the drug dealer bad boys, it's going to be constant abandonment by the masculine. And so you still want to avoid being alone. This is the genetic danger zone. Like women have never developed in isolation in the genetic history. Modernity is exceptional, but the natural disposition has historical pain associated with it. From dating to daughter, it's all painful. But that's how you break a cycle: is awareness, is repenting, and is orient yourself towards trusting external masculine. The problem is what you'll run into is sabotage. You'll sabotage yourself because what's natural is painful. And that's the inversion, right? So, like you can experience what can happen is like generally men take about 3 years now to marry, right? So 1 year, 2 year. As you get into the wife zone, right, you can sabotage it because that's not comfortable. That is not a relationship you're oriented, even though your body wants that structure. Your genetic body wants that structure. Your social programming does not. And I mean, pop culture is against this too. So as you get more and more close to trusting masculine, okay, you're going to sabotage it. How is that? Affairs. So 2 years in, average, have an affair. Now, but ultimately you don't want to be abandoned. So you know that this could drop the masculine out of the picture, right? Unless this is a insecure masculine, then he remains range bound, which is the topic of the discussion, right? If you're stuck in your past, you don't actually want to be wifed, right? You want this comfort zone, right? So you'll keep the baby daddy, right? And what is that connection? Weekend visits, in his space, remote connection, call about the kids, etc. You can have boyfriends in this. And I don't, I'm not going to bring around my kids, etc. What is that? Recreating the pattern. Same pattern. It's range bound. You can get paradoxical feedback, right? Counterproductive feedback in this. So, for example, you could say that an emotionally integrated person is not feminine enough, right? And to say that like it can just be, so it's like terrorism, right? It's undefinable, right? What is a terrorist? How do you stop? How do you end terrorism? How do you become emotionally integrated? What specifically do we need to do? And at the end of the day, it's like, I don't know, figure it out. Because you're not specific, you can't resolve it. It's undefined, so you can't resolve it, just like terrorism. And so you can't evolve beyond it, which is the point. The point is not being able to evolve around a, nonsensical argument, right? If you have something specific you want, then you can work on that. If it's defined, you can do that. You can say, "Oh, I can't feel your heart anymore," right? And you can't go beyond this. That puts the onus on the male partner, right, to fix an undefined problem. Because the point is actually not to fix it. This person doesn't want to go to therapy and get beyond it necessarily, likely, if they're stuck in the feedback loop. They want to keep it range bound. So, undefined problems, sabotage, right? Overt sabotage. So, like, think of it, what does an affair do, for example? Or even like an ambiguous affair. I cheated, but I'm sorry. Okay, I still love you. Okay. Well, why can you never move beyond that phase when you do that? Like, a woman cheating is a break of loyalty and trust, though she can never respect him after she does that. And so the relationship is dead, right? He can never respect himself by fully committing to her. So the relationship, as far as the wife goes, as far as a true partnership, is over. But, you could say, "Oh, but I still love you, etc. I made a mistake, etc." It still keeps you from dropping out, and it keeps you range bound, which is the comfort zone. So, something to be aware of as far as, the structures, the habits, the pain of the past. I mean, if they're aware of it and they've processed it and they can recognize that this is, like, the awareness is half the battle, or you can avoid it entirely. But this is a siren disposition, right? You want a masculine, but you don't actually want a masculine. You want to be a part-time wife, you don't want to be a full-time wife ever. And so you're going to stay friends with your exes in this situation, right? Because say you got a dude strong enough, he's not going to stay in that. So the problem is the men that stay in this comfort zone are not worth merging with. And that's another problem. It's completely unsustainable. But it's a reality for a lot of people because, like, there's millions, right? There's 50 million single women families. There's half of all 30-year-old females are single. And it has a lot to do with their choices. It has a lot to do with their family upbringing and that disposition and the culture they live in. But I think that's very common to not be able to move beyond a certain level of intimacy. Something to be aware of, guys.